Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/home soon.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. Busy week. We have the BC Premier facing a leadership review at his convention. We have the Heritage Conservation Act up for debate again with municipalities worried about the impact of that. And we have major projects, new announcements from the Prime Minister with a couple BC projects making that list. We're going to jump into all of that with our pod squad. Jillian Oliver, Allie Blades, and Jeff is away this week. So Mike McKinnon, senior consultant from Enterprise Canada, friend of the show, and one of Canada's foremost experts on Simpsons trivia, here this week to take us through all of this. And Mike, you'll be at the NDP convention on the weekend as well, which we'll get to a little bit later. So before we jump into anything, though, last week, lots of people happy to see my cat Ophelia jump up and disrupt the show. I put a call out for folks. If you have small cat migos that you would like featured on the show, little fuzzy politicos, we're showing some of them right now, who friends of the show who have one person did try to send me a dog photo. Of course, I immediately blocked and reported them, so they're no longer welcome on this show. This is a safe space. No photo here of Jillian's cat Bruce, who is leash trained, one of the most amazing cats in British Columbia, but we've featured him a lot. And Mike, I forgot to ask, do you have your own snowball at home? Not Santa's little helper.
We only have our own Santa's little helper.
Oh, well.
So I feel, I feel like the only political capital fan that doesn't have a cat. So,
Allie doesn't have one
either. Kick me off
but...
the pod, I understand.
No, I photoshopped a few cats into a photo of Allie once, and I think that's now prominently displayed in a gigantic thing on your wall, Allie, I assume.
That's technology being used for weaponry.
For good. That's for good. Not evil. Okay. Thank you for sending in cat photos. Feel free to send some more. We're always happy to do that. We're going to move on, though, to the first topic. Once again, Prime Minister Mark Carney out with his second tranche. He is the only person I know that uses the word tranche. So we are using the word tranche here. The second tranche of major projects for his major projects office. 2 BC projects making the list this time around: the Siliciums LNG project near Prince Rupert, the North Coast transmission line from Prince George to Terrace, potentially to the Yukon as well. This is the first tranche of projects. Had LNG Canada Phase 2 from British Columbia and the Red Chris gold and copper mine as well. So as the Premier put it, BC's doing pretty well on these major projects lists, Mike. What do we extrapolate from that? The Prime Minister was here to announce it. He was in Terrace. And what does it mean about where Ottawa and BC are at on some of these issues?
Well, for so long, we had like a scenario where you've got an Alberta government that's saying, the West isn't getting what they want, just hammering Ottawa over the head. You had a BC government that was saying, let's find a way to work together and maybe we can catch more flies with honey. And for a while, I think British Columbians would have been justified in saying, what are we really getting for this? Maybe the hit them over the head would be nice. I think Premier Eby's done that a couple of times and maybe been the one to speak up and say, you know what? We're not having our voices heard in Ottawa. Maybe it's easy to forget about BC. We're 3 hours behind. We're a long ways away from the Laurentian time zone. But he's actually been successful in being like-minded with the Prime Minister on the fact that we need to find a way to move major projects forward. That's the bottom line. And that's a growing thing across the political spectrum right now. I think you'd find New Democrats, Liberals, Conservatives are generally aligned that there is a significant need to find a way to move forward major projects. We are just not getting anything built in this country anymore. So these are really good steps. It's really good to see Ottawa recognize BC's role in unlocking significant investment that's going to benefit all Canadians, and the North Coast transmission line especially is the key to unlocking a lot of it, because without the power and without the ability to get it to these major industrial projects, we can't do that in a way that is better for our climate than fossil fuel powered industrial facilities. We need hydropower in order to do that, and this is what unlocks all of it. So a good news week, and hopefully more to come.
I was trying to figure out, Allie, the second time around here with the Prime Minister, like, what's this actually do? I think was kind of the question, right? The first time around, LNG Canada Phase 2 already has federal and environmental provincial approvals. Red Chris Mine doesn't need any federal approvals. This time around, Silicium's already has federal and provincial approvals, and the North Coast Transmission Line is a provincial project with legislation on the floor of the House right now to fast track through all the approval projects. What does putting it on a major projects list mean? And how do you view what Ottawa is doing with this and what BC benefits from if it's not in the form of like faster permits and approvals? Because conceivably we've already done that.
Well, what you've described are almost like two streams. So the first announcement being that he was able to the Prime Minister was able to show something that might get done very quickly and be able to say, I did that, even though he did none of that. With this second announcement, though, it's less of that photo op and more of a signaling of what's to come for the next generation. But I'll dive a little bit deeper into that, in that there have been a lot of positive headlines about this, of like, look at all of the attention being put onto BC. But at the same time, the skeptic in me is like, why? Why all of a sudden are we on the map? And, there are beautiful things, like the fact that we're focused on our Canadian sovereignty, and that we're diversifying our markets and getting things to Asia so that Asia is not beholden to Putin's LNG. But the other part of that is that we require a lot of help and lifelines when it comes to the regulatory process. And so in my view, it's almost like Ottawa has to come in, because we foresee some challenges on permitting processes and what this is going to mean as far as Indigenous communities getting involved. In the case of the LNG project with Silicium's, that there are some First Nations that are very opposed to this, that are neighboring to the project. And so we might not be able to navigate that alone. So we almost need, kind of like in mafia terms, for like our uncle to come in and fix the day and offer some muscle here. And so that's concerning, is why don't we have the regulatory path to do this on our own without that help? That's the big question. And we're going to be talking about the Heritage Conservation Act. And I think that they're intertwined in a very significant way. This isn't a good news story. This is a failure on our part for not creating the conditions for the certainty that we can do this alone. But am I thankful that the federal government is going to be able to come in and help us, because we will need those lifelines in order to get these good jobs and these good projects? Sure. But we really do have a long way to go.
Jillian, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that it's looking more and more like this major projects office really is about shoring up certainty for investors, and sort of sending that signal to folks that the federal government is committed to getting these projects done, whether that's by clearing regulatory hurdles. Carney hasn't yet declared any of these projects in the national interest, but if he does, that enables him to override First Nations vetoes, and also that it didn't come with much money in the way of money from the federal government, just a small loan, but perhaps that there could be more coming if it was needed in the future for these specific projects.
Mm-hmm. He did say at one point, because there was a lot of questions to Carney, okay, well, how are you going to solve the different First Nations who oppose and support this? And he was basically like, that's not kind of really what we're doing here. We're sending a signal to proponents making their kind of final investment decisions that we're here for you. to let you know you're wanted, and we will help you solve these issues as we go forward. So maybe that's the real value of it. Mike, not mentioned here, was the Shelbyville to our Springfield, Alberta. I know you come from Alberta, so you probably object to that, but nonetheless, the idea that oil pipelines not in here. Are we just getting fattened up in BC? This is one of the questions to sort of the premier. Are we just getting fattened up by putting on the major projects list from Ottawa at the front, so when they drop the elbow on us later with an oil pipeline from Alberta, the premier can be like, well, we still did get our other things. Do you think that might be possible?
What pipeline project?
The one that the Prime Minister and the Premier of Alberta say they're signing a memorandum of agreement on something at some point by the Grey Cup, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I get the question. You know, I'm posing the silly question back because as has been canvassed a lot of times on this show and with the premier and with all the leaders involved in this is where is the private sector proponent that is moving this forward? But like the prime minister does continue to hint about this in some way, and I think what everyone needs to know about this and has been talked about already is that there needs to be a way to if a pipeline project that is completely hypothetical at this point is somehow going to be successful, then what is going to happen to ensure that all of the First Nations along the route, those coastal First Nations that are opposed to lifting the tanker ban and would also lift their consent to the many other real projects that exist right now, if there is not some way to bridge that gap, then there's going to be a real problem on the hands of the federal government and any government that is trying to impose a pipeline on them. So how do you actually bridge that gap? No one has come forward with a solution to that. You've got leaders in Alberta who are just using it as a political hammer to hit BC over the head with it, to hit the prime minister over the head with it, and until there is some way to find common ground on that, and no one has been doing that to this point. So I think it's a really difficult conversation to have at this point.
Mm-hmm. Allie, do you think we're going to have it, or are we just destined to get stuck in this kind of cycle for the near future?
To the NDP government's chagrin, we're going to have it. And guess what? It's almost like child A and child B are going to be sat at the table with the parent known as Ottawa to say we have to get along in order for the betterment of our country. And let me tell you, when it comes to Alberta and Albertans trying to push this pipeline forward, imaginary or not, this is very real for them. Like, we're seeing politicians say, well, what about the pipeline? This is announcement number 2, and it's still not happening. And so what we're going to see is that eventually they're going to get set down and say that we're going to have to get along because this is the leadership of this is where Ottawa comes in. David Eby can stand up for his province all he wants, but when it involves 2 provinces, this is where we're going to need that mediation.
Yeah. Jillian, I was struck by there's a lot of environmental opposition to just the LNG projects that keep getting added to this list. Some of that comes from within the NDP. I'm looking at the convention policies, and there's a lot of concern about LNG and natural gas and pipelines. And it feels like maybe the premier's trying to thread a needle here between, pipelines are one step too far, but LNG is okay. Or do you think he's navigating a dynamic within his own base in the way he's handling the pipeline issue?
I think for sure. The tanker ban resolution at the NDP convention is right at the top of the list, and you can see the LNG ones are pushed far down, so hopefully they won't get to discussion. And I think certainly the NDP has been trying to make the argument that previous Conservative and BC Liberal governments made, that LNG is a bridge fuel as we sort of work towards decarbonizing. But the problem is that they keep pushing through these projects that are blowing past our own emissions, using clean hydropower to try to keep the emissions down when there's tons of other projects that need those, as well as, in order to electrify, we need a ton of power to meet Clean BC's goals. I think it is a looming problem for them as emissions continue to rise, and as every study that comes out about LNG just shows that it's worse for the climate than previously thought. So I think it is an issue for them. And I think another really important point that the Green Party made this week was that the Kyla Sims project in particular is funded by US companies, and we're using the excuse of tariffs and needing to be Canada strong to enrich American fossil fuel companies. And I think that is going to be an increasingly difficult needle for him to thread.
Mm-hmm. I think he'll try to say that, the North Coast transmission line electrifies these plants and therefore they're less harmful to the environment, but we have not seen how he reconciles that within the Clean BC framework and the climate framework that he's the Premier's negotiating with Greens. I just want to make some space for some other topics here. And one talk about the Heritage Conservation Act. We talked about this in September at the UBCM convention. Municipalities said these changes to boost protection of Indigenous cultural sites are going to slow down building, lead to costs. They're very concerning. They're vague. The Premier said, we hear you. Why don't we have another 6-7 weeks of talking about it? That ended this week, and UBCM said, you know what? We still don't like this. We think it needs to be paused. All our municipalities are concerned. What does the government do now, Mike? I think, in the intervening time and between when they started the Heritage Conservation Act back in 2023, I think they co-developed this thing. We've got all sorts of tensions and pressures on the file, including the Cowichan Nation ruling. Do you see the government? How does the government navigate this now with all these municipalities still concerned on a hot topic file like this? Do you think?
And this is one of those things where it seems like there is unanimity among municipalities that this isn't working. This isn't like, housing legislation, for example, where you've got this group over here who says, great, we can do it, and we're going to take advantage of the supports the province is having. In this case, it seems like there's a real problem for every municipality. And at the same time, we have a very real problem in the province that we already talked about a little bit earlier, is like, we just can't get anything built. We can't get housing built. We can't get major projects built. This is a problem in Canadian society right now across the country that governments are having and trying to find ways to resolve. It's clear that we need the ability to issue permits. We need the ability to build housing and schools and hospitals and not have to go through 5 years of permitting processes. So that's the laudable goal that everyone has agreed. The Heritage Conservation Act, as it stands, is just not working. Do you need to just extend the consultation further, or do you need to, as a government, decide we're going to take an action? At some point, we can't just consult to death on this. We need to take an action, and we're going to piss some people off to do that. Now, do you want to take on the municipalities on this issue? I think the Premier made it clear yesterday, I believe, that on Thursday, that if it's not working for municipalities, then we need to go back to the drawing board. So it seems like we're in for a longer ride on this one.
Mm-hmm. It does seem like that, Allie, but I'm not sure he had any other kind of choice on it. I do think sometimes this government's tendency is to push forward and absorb the criticism later, but I don't know if the context would allow him to do that this time.
But didn't he also say that he wanted to get this done by spring as well? And so, everything that I'm reading, it's that there's not a whole lot of runway to get this done in a way that offers that thorough consultation that we're all proposing here or suggesting in order to get it done right. But let's dive deeper into that. Like, why do we need to get this right? So if you're at home and you're thinking like, okay, how does this impact me at all? Like the reason is because there's over 60,000 known heritage sites in BC. And then the problems that we're experiencing are cost delays and economic impacts. So this is going to affect housing, infrastructure, and emergency response. So the longer permitting. This is what I find absolutely ridiculous. Let me pause here. 3 permits required to get things done. Like, why? This is where, like, these are easy, just like common sense things that the government can do to fix the bottlenecks. But for whatever reason, that's just not going to happen. Or at least we haven't paid particular attention to it. What the office is saying is that they also need more resources, and there's not a whole lot of promise for additional money to fix those resources. Why it also matters, though, is that going back to the major projects office and my criticism of, how do we get along and get these projects built when we're also dealing with these amendments to the act, is that it involves First Nations in a very critical way. And so there is a discussion of uncertainty of whose responsibility is it when there's overlapping territories? Like, is that going to now be the municipality's jurisdiction? Is it going to be the First Nations amongst themselves? Where's the leadership there? And then in the case that we could look at is the Site C Dam, which was subject to several lawsuits launched by the First Nations because they argued that it violated their treaty rights.
I thought you were going to say Lytton. That would be another case to look at, right?
But that's exactly it, right? And so these are two cases that we can tangibly see where those delays are. So that's actually a very good point.
I'm just not. I guess I'm not seeing the point is well taken, I guess, but I haven't seen in the Heritage Conservation Act changes how it fixes that. In fact, the opposite, Jillian, seems to be the criticism from municipalities. It's going to make it harder. It's by expanding the definitions of items and sites to be preserved, including to intangible areas and oral cultures. You're actually not moving in the direction that the Premier says you're moving in, which is to make it easier. You're kind of, maybe the municipalities are saying, actually, you're doing the opposite here. But I don't know.
Yeah, I think likely the province's hope was because the new process was co-developed with First Nations, you have that buy-in at the outset. There's a process in place that they support, and then you have less of the sort of episodic challenges as the process goes forward. I think the problem, like you said, is that it puts a lot more onus on municipalities to verify archaeological records and make sure they're in compliance with the Act. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of the provincial government's approach to housing density, where they've put all of this pressure on municipalities but are not providing them with resources for infrastructure. And that's one of the biggest things that the municipalities are asking for, is for resources for staffing and to make sure that they can actually implement these changes. And to me, I think that's where the province really needs to step up. If they're going to dictate that they want these changes to go forward in the spring, I think they're going to have to step up and support municipalities to implement them, because they only have so much taxation power, and the province has a lot more.
Yeah, except the province doesn't have any money, so that'll be hard to do. Okay, we're out of time. I got to stop it there. Did get to the NDP convention conversation, but that is an audio podcast extra, so make sure you subscribe to the podcast for a wide-ranging discussion about that. Thank you so much to Mike for filling in for Jeff. Thanks for Jillian and Allie for being here, and thank you for watching. We'll be back next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/homesoon.